Hey, it's Mazzy here. So I want to talk about the state of audiophile records, audiophile issues, and what it means to me in my collection, the good, bad, and the ugly of it. Maybe no ugly, or maybe there is some ugliness because, and maybe it's accidental because of the limited pressings, because of the expense, the cost, and because of the limited capacity in record pressing plants and the demand that has increased just over the last literally 2 or 3 years in many cases, and how people who weren't even into audiophile records or even jazz records, because there's a big segment of these that I have in my collection that are jazz, and how it's gotten a little wacky. And there's been a fervor and, dare I say, a little greed with people buying them, keeping them sealed, hoarding them, flipping them, buying as many copies as they can when they can. And this is clamor of what we're going to miss. And I want to talk a little bit about that. I have friends who are, as you know, watching my channel, people I've collaborated with, the two Michaels with the four corners, Michael, 45 RPM in Germany, who's pretty much, I don't say exclusively into the audiophile world, but that's a big part of it. And he does a lot of comparisons. He buys a lot of multi-copies, and that's what he chooses to do, and I admire that. And he does a lot of comparisons. I rarely buy multiple copies unless it's a record I really like, so I do more of the limited situation on it. But this, and then Michael in Los Angeles, the musician from Balmorhea, who noted and archived his channel, is gotten into jazz just in the last few years, and really got into classical, neoclassical, jazz, audiophile releases. But he also, he gets into certain lo-fi artists as well. So we all have our different segments, and not that one is better or worse. And I'm not going to slam anybody for getting into whatever they want to collect. And I know these kind of videos bring out people saying it's all about rich people buying records and not, and it's not just that. Now, to talk about the audiophile thing a little bit, let's talk about the CD era. And in a way, these audiophile labels held on to vinyl. And companies like Mobile Fidelity would still, even though they got heavily into compact discs and SACDs, and certain labels would do audiophile pressings. We talk about in the 2000s, Music Matters Jazz. We talk about classic records in the 90s. And I'm not going to do a big overview of that, but I want to talk about how these things relate to my collection and where I am now, what I like and what I don't like. And part of this came about because of this box set that I literally got last week. And this is Bill Evans' Riverside Recordings, and this is the Analog Productions. There was two pressings. This is the Palace pressing, European pressings from 2010. They also did, I believe, a 27 pressing, that QRP, or 2017 pressing, excuse me, that QRP pressed. And Analog Productions and QRP are one and the same, really. So they're that's kind of them doing it in-house. And this is a double 45 archive, audiophile archive of 11 records, 45 2 LPs, of the greatest albums Bill Evans has ever made. Maybe those of you who don't know Bill Evans, one of the greatest melodic jazz piano players. In a way, one of the anchors of the Miles Davis kind of blue, and composer on several tracks that unfortunately he never got credited for. I think Miles, I famously said this story about Bill Evans requested a credit on a particular a piece of music on the album, and Miles just gave him a $20 bill or something like that, and go into the Miles voice. But this is a copy that my friend Coffee Dave bought in 2010 and kept sealed. Now, I am one who hates that concept of people buying these huge, wonderful, somewhat expensive box sets and keeping them sealed. And I know Dave really well, and I know Dave wasn't even thinking of the flipping thing. He put it aside, and his records aren't quite as organized, and I say that kindly because I love Dave. Stuff all over. So he put it aside, and it just never got to it. It's as simple as that. I think he bought it in the moment. I'm thinking these were $600 then for 11 records. They could have been less. So if someone knows better, let me know. Now they were available for a number of years. They didn't sell out right away. That was the nature of audiophile sets in those days. They would last literally for years in many cases. And the vinyl resurgence hadn't really kicked in a heated way. Where we're at now, and they did a repress, and they put it aside. I acquired it because David and I have been dealing with the Coleman collection and pulling things for our own collections. And he mentioned, we were talking about Bill Evans, and he mentioned he had it. I had no idea he had it, and I've been to his house many times for listening sessions, and I never saw it and had it. And I said, oh my God, that's something I literally lust after. And it goes for a lot of money now, well over $900, $1,000 in some cases. Now, Acoustic Sound site has it as a back order, which means when they show something as a back order, that means they're probably going to press it eventually. And up until literally a week or two ago, it was still listed at $600. And what's good or bad or ugly about this kind of stuff, if you see something you really want as a back order, I mean, it could take years for them to repress. Pre-order it. If it's Acoustic Sounds, you won't get charged until the order ships, which could be in a year from now, or it could be 5 years from now, and all of a sudden you get a huge charge on your credit card for that $600 in that case. Well, what happened last week, there's been rumblings about a repress on this. Let me just, as I talk about this, show you these beautiful covers, 245s. They're not gatefolds, which is fine by me, and they're just a stunningly beautiful set. I finally played them all. The other thing that I will mention, I believe it's this album, one of my favorite albums. I never had a good pressing. There's a little gouge in the first track, and it looks like two metal things attached it. And when you don't open for something for 10 years or so, you can't return it. Now, it doesn't skip, but it has a click that goes on for about 40 seconds. Very irritating. It's the only glitch on 11 records. So I hate that, but of course, if you open this right away, when you get these records, you're able to exchange them. So that's something, don't keep your records sealed. I don't understand people who do that. I don't understand the purpose of that. This idea that you need a backup of an audiophile record, a friggin' backup. Why do you need a backup of a record? I have records I've had for 50 years. I don't need a backup. Now, having said that, if it's something I really like, my Beatle collection, I've gotten multiple copies for different reasons. And it's mostly for trade. I, except for one time, have never flipped a record. Now, my record collection has gotten more valuable, and as I get older, when I do sell it, I'm going to reap those rewards of the higher prices. But I don't like to think in terms of what my collection is worth. And I know that's a big thing now for people. And of course, I see it. I have 2/3 of my collection on Discogs, and it's gone crazy. Waltz for Debbie, God, great record. Oh, this is wonderful. And so anyway, there's mumblings of this going back in press, and Acoustic Sounds and now has raised the price to $900. I'm a little bothered by that. In fact, I'm a lot bothered by that. Now, granted, prices have gone up for pressing plants, for labor, for inflation. Everything has gone up. And if people who pre-ordered for the $600 price will get it for $600, I think it was Melinda Murphy who had pre-ordered this, and she actually called up and it was confirmed that she'll get this set for $600, which now is looking to be a good deal. And the $900 price tag is still less than what flippers are selling it for. What's beautiful about this was mastered by Steve Hoffman, those of you who know the Steve Hoffman Forum. He did a wonderful job, and again, incredible sound and recording. Orrin Keep News produced a lot of these records. Someone who I had met years ago, he had a show on KSAN Radio just prior, I can't remember if it was before or after my girlfriend's weekend radio show on KSAN Rec, Nancy Newhouse, who was on it in San Francisco. So I had every week, he would be there with his wife. His wife would help him with his records, and I would talk to him about jazz and these jazz artists and Monk and Bill Evans, and I was a 23, 24-year-old, young man learning about jazz, and looking back on it now, the value of that, talking to the great Orrin Keepnews. And if you don't know his name, just Google him. And he started Riverside Records, and which was later sold to Fantasy. His pedigree is amazing. So I want to get into this a little bit, talking about audiophile things, but I do have a problem with this now. Acoustic Sounds listing this, even though it's still pre-order, you can pre-order for $900. Some say that's just the nature of business. I think, they're in-house. Now, maybe their licensing costs went up, but I don't know, because I hope that Kraft, Universal owns this music, so I hope Kraft does a 33 and a third version of it, like they did with the great Chet Baker box, that are reasonably priced records at what, $25, $26 or something. This whole idea that there are going to be something like $82, $83 a piece for a double 45 album. Now, you could argue, well, Music Matters Jazz, which I'll get into in a little bit, charges that now, and they had a whole wonky price scheme after the fact. And I'm going to talk about that. So stay with me for a little while. We're going to have this discussion, and chime in if you like. Thank you. Okay, let's talk about SRX vinyl and Music Matters Jazz in general. Music Matters Jazz, Ron Ronbach and Joe Harley. In a way, they were pioneers too. They did this jazz series. I believe they started in the late 90s, early 2000s, I believe. I might have that wrong, so you can research that. But the point is, they licensed some of the war horses, these main wonderful records from Blue Note Records. And again, this was a time when vinyl wasn't so prevalent and wasn't so in demand. So a lot of labels had no problem licensing things. Now, I always try to explain this to people, because since I work with photographers and licensing, it is different. But I've worked with record companies before on album covers, and when you do photographs for a commercial client, you license the rights to the image for a specific amount of time and at a territory. For instance, it could be North American rights for 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. You can do it in perpetuity, but most of the time we don't like doing that unless the purchaser pays a larger usage, a larger license. It's the same with this. Music Matters Jazz, as well as independents, like in the rock and roll and pop world, Intervention Records does a great job of licensing things from A&M and things of Matthew Sweet from, is that a Sony group? I forgot what label Matthew Sweet was on. They've done A&M Records with the Flying Burrito Brothers, and Shane over there, pretty much a one-man operation, has done a fantastic job. And those records are selling for maybe $35 to $40. Stoughton covers, some cases 45, some cases 33 RPM. Beautifully sounded records. Kevin Gray cut, I believe, in most cases, which I think is wonderful. And he's able to sell those, different scale of things. Music Matters Jazz started at, I believe, $35 to $40 a piece, and they started doing all 45 RPM, double 45. But the demand really changed, and a lot of people prefer the 33. Now, I've done back-to-backs. I have about 75 Music Matters Jazz records. This entire section up here are Music Matters Jazz. And half of them are at 45 RPM. When you really sit down and listen to a 45, yes, it's better, it's more dynamic, more air, all that, the fancy schmancy audiophile lingo you can imagine. But having said that, for me, I would in a heartbeat trade all my 45 RPM Music Matters Jazz for 33 versions. They dived into 33 later because I think they saw the demand was there. There's something about when an artist makes an album, of the continuity of the album, the flow of the album, and having to flip. And it's not just old lazy farts not wanting to get up out of their chair to flip a record after 8 minutes or 10 minutes instead of 20 minutes. but there is something to the flow of the record. So they started doing 33s, and then they came out in 2019 with this SRX formula, special vinyl formula. They did these records on 33. These are just two of them. They did, I mean, these are two of the best records, obviously, most popular records in the Blue Note catalog. Blue Train, John Coltrane, is only album for Blue Note as a leader, and Midnight Blue, Kenny Burrell. Two fantastic albums, and these are released as SRXs. SRX 33 and the third. Now, the thing about the vinyl formula, which you can probably see here, it's somewhat transparent. You can see the reflection, obviously, but if you show it up to a light a little bit, you actually see through it. And that's how you can tell the SRX formula. I can see through as a translucent, semi-transparent vinyl formula. And they sound amazing. Now, in 2019, in January, they released, I believe it was either 9 or 12 titles all at once. And you could buy the entire group of these 9 or 12 records for, I believe, $699. A lot of money. But for those 12 records, a steal now, as we all know. They also sold them individually. I believe they were $59, I think. So you could buy them individually. But then obviously certain titles were selling out, but after a few months, not right away. And the only way to get the whole collection was to buy the full set for $699. And I had purchased a few Music Matters 45 RPM jazz records over the years, over a decade ago, more than that, for about $40 to $45 a piece. So I got in at a good time, except for a few titles later. I didn't pay exorbitant prices, with exceptions, because that's not what I'm into, and I'm not trying to be a completist. Again, I have about 75 out of, 120, 130, I'm not sure how many albums they released. But my point is, that package of a dozen albums or whatever it was for $699, I didn't buy that set until August of 2019. So that's like 8 months later. Those were sitting around for 8 months, and I even think through the end of that year, or close to the end of that year, they hadn't sold out. The frenzy wasn't there. The frenzy hadn't started yet until midway, maybe into 2020 or early 2020, and of course in the last year and during the pandemic especially. So this frenzy has been created partly to do with the forums, whether it's, Hoffman forums or any other places you talk about music here on YouTube, on our channel, my channel, channels like Michael and some of the other YouTubers that really promote jazz and archival releases. So these records were available, and they're wonderful pressings. They're great. What I don't like in the last year and a half, and I agree with some of the other, Ken Micallef, like really slam Music Matters Jazz because of this practice. Joe Harley moved on. Joe Harley was brought in by Blue Note, and he started the Tone Poet. Basically, Blue Note wanted to replicate the Music Matters experience, and Joe Harley said, great covers, great pressings. I want Kevin Gray. You need to do A, B, C, D. And he got everything he wanted, it seems, seemingly from Don Was. And the thing is, I don't know if it's part of the agreement, he decided, at least initially, and he hasn't repeated any of the titles that he did with Music Matters Jazz, which I commend him for. But now that those are gone, I hope Music Matters Jazz titles, those great Blue Note war horses, I hope they're pressed as Tone Poets, because we all know those retail for about $35, $36. You can get them for about $26 to $28, dependingly, and sometimes on sale cheaper. Great value. They're selling, 10,000, 15,000 on up of some of these great titles. Going back to the licensing issue that I said, people say, why doesn't Music Matters or whoever just press more? Well, when you do that licensing thing, you get a specific license. Blue Note's not going to say, oh, Music Matters Jazz, you can do whatever you want. They probably initially said you can do the 45 RPMs because we're keeping the 33s for ourselves. That's what most consumers want. And they were doing the Blue Note 75s and so on. which were digital and not very good until the Blue Note 80s and the Blue Note Classics and the Tone Poets. Are you with me? Are you sticking with me? I know it's confusing. But you have a specific license, and you can only press, sometimes it's a time period, but a lot of times it's probably a quantity. So maybe you can press 1,000 copies or 1,500 copies or 3,000 copies. Like when you look at the Blue Note here, special limited edition recordings from the original master tapes. Doesn't say the amount here, but I believe the early Music Matters jazz hype stickers. I think they had the 45s were 3,000 or 3,500, and the 33s were less. So again, just a rough documentation of that. So they can't, they're limited. And also now we're in a situation today where the pressing plants are so tight and so full, they can't keep up even with their own titles. Now with Music Matters, now with Tone Poet, Blue Note, owned by Universal, has so much press time. They're going to press, 65 variants of a Paul McCartney 3 in color, and they're going to press a Billie Eilish variant and the big, monster sellers probably first in so many ways. And we all want the great pressing plants, QRP, Palace, to press these things. And of course, there's the issue of quantity and quality and what's, balancing that out. So I love those Music Matters Jazz, but in the last year and a half, they got into this thing of this almost like stock market pricing, where if something got limited, they'd raise it up to $70, to $80, to $90. They stopped selling to wholesalers, to retailers, and they kept it all in-house. So you're buying directly from them. They're charging a shitload of money for shipping. And I feel sorry even for the Europeans and people out of the US. Those shipping costs are outrageous. You have to, pay, $200 before you get free shipping. And if you put 3 records together, it was coming out to like 198.75 or something. So you had to buy a whole fucking another record to get free shipping, which is, $20 or whatever, $15, whatever it is. So, is this greed on the part of these companies? Is it just good business sense? They figured, hey, people are flipping it. Why don't we get it? I don't like that philosophy, and that, in a way, what kind of started me on this concept for this video, because of Acoustic Sounds raising the price to $900 of the set. Is it worth it? Those records at $84 a piece, you have to buy them all at once? Probably, but most people don't want to pay $80 for a double 45. Again, we've seen craft recordings. We've seen, craft, Riverside, the Riverside albums. This is exactly what we're talking about. Now, these are the Chet Baker records. These are beautiful covers, beautiful pressings, beautiful mastering. These run about, $30 a piece, 28 to 32 or something like that. That's reasonable for an audiophile recording. Craft should do all these Bill Evans records. Now, if they do that, will that dampen the market for the 45 RPM box? I tell you, if it was me, I would have bought the Craft version over that. Now, if you A-B them again, I know Michael again in Germany has been doing all these great A-B tests and A-Bing and multi-copies of records, shootouts, basically. I don't really do that, and I don't even do that at home. Once in a while, if I'm really into a record, I might compare, but that's just not my thing. I respect people who do that. It's not for me. I don't like this concept of buying, 4 or 5 copies of the same title all the time. Again, asterisk with exceptions. So this is what I would like to do. And it's been proven with things like this and some of the other boutique record labels like Sam, One Man Shop in France, that's doing these great audiophile recordings, and those things sell for about $35, $40 tops. And we know they can do that. Now, licensing costs have changed. Pressing plants have increased price. These Stoughton covers and these beautiful printed covers are expensive. I understand the whole chain of events. What's happening more and more are these labels are keeping a lot of these things in-house. So the mobile fidelity, for instance, it's hard for them to get in stores in some cases and retailers. And that's why all of a sudden you see something pop up on social networking or through a rumor on the Hoffman forums, and you have to jump. You have to jump. And people, older people say, I don't do Twitter, and I don't do Instagram, or I don't do Facebook. You're left out. You have to do Instagram. And I've said this on many of my videos before. Even if you decide not to be an Instagram poster, follow mobile fidelity, follow acoustic sounds, follow craft, follow your favorite artist. That's where you find out this stuff first. That's how I found out about the Bob Dylan MoFi and the Jeff Beck MoFi, This special super vinyl copy of Desire went up on, I just happened to see it because I go through Instagram for my business. And I saw it, I bought it within hours. It was gone, 1,000 copies of it, $75. Double 45 RPM, the best sounding version of this. Expensive, yes. Best. Now this is going for more. But again, I don't flip records. I don't like that concept. Jeff Beck, Truth, the same thing. It's sold out. Now, in some cases, this is going to be the end of their license, possibly. In some cases, we're hearing that they can press more of certain titles. I'll use this as an example, and I hate to be picking on acoustic sounds here, but the UHQR Miles Davis Kinda Blue with Bill Evans, who got stiffed financially on this. Beautiful box. A wasted space thing. Same with the UHQRs of all these records, the Mobile Fidelity One Steps. Why do you have to put two records, double 45, in a box like this? Because you're paying $100, $125 for these things, and you have to feel value, I just want to, I'm going to throw that fucker away. This is all you need. This is essentially like the Music Matters Jazz. Super vinyl, their formula, whatever they call it. Beautiful cover, numbered edition, numbered like 25,000 for the stereo version, and eventually they'll do a mono. They've had issues with noisy vinyl. It's hard to deal with this vinyl. My copy is good, is really good. These are basically the stampers from Classic Records, and Classic Records is another one that sold records, not crazy prices, and those are expensive, and people have kept those sealed. I got a copy of Tommy, a classic version of Tommy, that was sealed for the last, 15 years since it came out, whatever it was. There's a big glob on the beginning of side 2, so I have to skip the first minute and a half of that song. It never been opened. What can I do? I'm fucked. Okay. There were some issues with some of these records. Noisy, some of these records. Mine is not a dead silent record. My intervention records that Shane is doing of The Church, of the Flying Burrito Brothers, my Sam records that are $35 are quieter than this super duper $125 copy of Miles Davis. Does it sound better, the best version of anything I have that I've heard? I've heard a 6i. I might even like this better than the 6i. I mean, the originals are great. I get originals when I can. When I go through the Coleman collection, I found a bunch of 6i's of certain titles, not this one. But, I love this. But does it need this? No, it doesn't need that shit. You don't need that shit. You don't need a wall of this thing protecting his albums like there's some, holy grail that you just, dug out of an Egyptian tomb or something. Your records, these 5,000 plus records I've kept in good shape for over 50 years in some cases. And if you take care of your records, you don't have to treat them like, oh my God, I can't touch this thing. I have to keep it sealed in the corner of my room. There are great audiophile labels doing these things cheap. The Craft has their version, the small batch. I bought the first one, the Lush Life record, Coltrane record, which is fantastic. $100, Rush, and it goes crazy and people reselling it. Am I going to buy another one? No. Don't give a shit. Even that slim box, which is better than this big fucker, is nice, is better than this, but it's not necessary. I did get the second one, but my friend Michael again missed out on it, so he bought it. I sold to him for what I paid for it. I could have sold it for 2 to 3 times more on the open market, but I'd rather if I find something like that, and I know someone who wants it. Again, going full circle to the Bill Evans box. This Bill Evans box. Coffee Dave had it. He could have flipped it for $1,500, $2,000 probably. I gave him a blue Beatles UK stereo box, the blue box from 1991, all analog. That sells for about $350. I gave him a Hendrix, a Groovy Children's, like $100 box set, and a couple other things. So, he got back what he paid 10 years ago. He could have made more, but we're friends. I've traded stuff for him that's more valuable for less stuff. It depends. I appreciate when people are into the music. Those people deserve it, and I try to do that. Interesting discussions, and I think these kind of discussions are happening on various channels about the audiophile world. There's people that are excited about it, and we're at a heyday of vinyl, except it's getting expensive and crazy in some ways. We're also getting into this thing, there's always been flippers, but there's a bit of greediness too, which I find abhorrent. And again, if you have a record you've had and you sold it for more money, the market value, I have no problem with a one-off like that. But to buy records for the sake of flipping them, I just don't like that. Now, is it legal, moralistic? Being moral, is it a moral issue? You got to do what you want to do. I don't like these labels doing it. I don't like that Music Matters Jazz, who had printed these things that had been on the shelves, had this kind of up and down price bullshit. I hated that. I don't like that this box set, the Bill Evans box set is, going up in price to $900, like all of a sudden, really? And they don't even have a schedule when it's going to be impressed. If they said, okay, this is coming out in March of 2022, here's the price, would I be a little more, liberal about my opinion on this? Maybe. But I don't know. I don't like that. It leaves a bad taste in my mouth, especially since they're doing it in-house. I don't know. And again, I don't know the economics at there, and Chad Kasem and the people there and any of these other labels, they have their, it's a lot of shitload of money to run a business with insurance and labor and everything and, taxes and stuff. So I got to give them that benefit, but it just leaves a bad taste going from a $600 thing a week ago to a $900 thing, unless they finally did the numbers and this is what it's going to cost them and they need to make a profit, which is fine. There's something a little like, just leaves a bad taste in my mouth. But so share your thoughts here. Thanks for watching. Mazzy loves you. And I love this great sound stuff. So I straddle between the two of just a great record. Doesn't have to be an audiophile masterpiece. Just great music. Again, it's about the music, and a good pressing and good value too. It's hard to keep all those things, make them work and make them jive. Take care.